Eeuwenlang was hout onze voornaamste energiebron, gebruikt om te koken, huizen te verwarmen en ambachten te drijven. Maar naarmate de steden groeiden en de vraag toenam, vonden we iets krachtigers, diep verborgen in de aarde: kolen. Door de transitie naar kolen kregen we stoommachines, we konden onze steden verlichten en het zette de industriële revolutie in gang. Het veranderde de wereld voorgoed. In de 20e eeuw nam olie het stokje over. Lichter, krachtiger, gemakkelijker te vervoeren. Waardoor auto's, vliegtuigen en massaproductie konden opkomen. Een tijdperk van eindeloze groei. Vandaag staan we aan de vooravond van een nieuwe energietransitie. De overgang naar hernieuwbare energie, zoals zon en wind, die het einde van fossiel zal betekenen.
This is completely rubbish. This is a false history of energy that is projected to promote a false future. At the global level, we have just added energies on top of the other. We have not passed peak coal, peak oil, peak gas. So this idea of energy transition is deeply flawed. Energy transition is a more subtle way of climate denial in a way. It is a way to be on the good side of the history. Energy transition is about investment, it is about new technologies, it is about capital. Many people talk about energy transition as if there had been several energy transitions in the past, and what we have to do facing climate change is just like another energy transition. John Kerry, the US envoy for climate change, said exactly that in the Financial Times. What we have to do is a new industrial revolution, as if the industrial revolution was anything like an energy transition. And it is a deeply false history, and this false history has plenty of political consequences, because then you think that climate change is just, a new problem that capitalism, innovation will solve, as if we had done energy transition in the past thanks to innovation and capitalism. And this is a deeply wrong story. The standard narrative of the Industrial Revolution as a shift from wood to coal has many different problems. Because of coal, industrialized countries consume more and more wood. One example is railroads. In the US, at the end of the 19th century, railroads consume 6 times more wood than steel. To produce steel, you need coal. So the railways is more wood technology than coal technology in a way. And the more you've got coal, the more you produce good, the more you need packaging. So you need crates, you need barrels. There is an expansion of food consumption for all sorts of reasons. In the same way, the idea that there is a shift from coal to oil in the 20th century is clearly flawed. To produce a car, Ford company in the 1930s would need 7 tons of coal to produce an automobile, because they needed coal to produce their own steel, their own electricity. So the automobile is a coal technology just as an oil technology. And then to produce the oil infrastructure, all the pipes, you need a tremendous amount of coal. In the US, there was an oil boom, and at that point, the oil industry consumed more steel than the whole US economy 1 century before.
Oil is flowing through an incredible 800-mile-long pipeline that stretches over and under the state of Alaska. It crosses wide rivers and winds through forests until it reaches Valdez Harbor, where the oil is loaded into tankers. Oil from Alaska's North Slope to provide more energy for a strong America.
The history of energy at a global level is the history of stacking up energies on top of the other. Energies and materials are deeply intertwined. They are entangled, and that the history of energy is not a history of transition, but it is the history of the symbiotic expansion of everything. Everything grows together. Today we are living with all sources of energies. For wood, some estimate put that the world consumption at the beginning of the 20th century was 1 billion cubic meters, and today we're at 4 billion cubic meters of wood. For coal, I think we are consuming something like around 8 gigatons of coal. World consumption in the 1970s was around 3 gigatons, so it has increased a lot. And for oil, we are probably plateauing now, but it will remain at a very high plateau. We are basically around 100 million barrels per day of oil consumption. One of the biggest problems around the discourse about energy transition is that it is focused on technologies. It is understood as a technological change. The problem is that the dynamics of technology is completely different from the dynamics of materials. There are massive changes in the technology. I mean, technologies do become obsolete sometimes. Raw materials are never obsolete. Despite all the innovations that we had during the 20th century, all raw materials, or nearly all raw materials, have grown. I will give you the example of lighting. In the early 20th century, the most common way to produce artificial light was the kerosene lamp, petroleum lamp. It was cheap, so it was very widely used, especially in the rural world. And then came electricity, which is a true technological revolution, a massive technological shift. Nevertheless, we are burning more and more oil to produce artificial light in the 20th century. Today, only the headlights of the automobiles consume more oil than the world economy at the beginning of the 20th century, when most of the people were using oil lamps, kerosene lamps, right? So you've got a massive technological transformation, but raw materials are growing and growing and growing.
Het wordt wel de grootste naoorlogse verbouwing van Nederland genoemd, de energietransitie.
Vandaag spreken wij over een belangrijk onderdeel van de voortgang van de energietransitie.
De ambitie van de energietransitie.
Global Clean Energy Transition.
The term energy transition is quite recent. For the biggest part of the 20th century, the experts never talked about energy transition because they knew what I just explained. Then there was a small group of experts who started to talk about energy transition. They are from the US, and they are atomic scientists. Most of them participated to the Manhattan Project, which is the big project for the creation of the first atomic bomb during World War II. They were horrified by what they had done, a terrible tool of destruction, but they explained that what they had created was also the key for the long-term survival of humanity. Because with nuclear energy, you can create an enormous amount of energy. And it was a way to replace the fossil fuels when they will have been burnt. So it was really a long-term futurology. So they started to use energy transition to describe this very long-term process. It would take several centuries to get out of fossil fuels because they know that there is a lot of coal under our feet, and they knew also that it would take time for atomic energy to diffuse and to be spread in the poor world, especially. What is really strange is that we have used this very, very heterodoxical futurology to reflect upon climate change. Because for the climate crisis, we have to do the energy transition not in 3 or 4 centuries, but in 3 or 4 decades. And we have to do it whereas there is still a lot of coal under the ground. So this idea of energy transition really became popular in the 1970s. It is the decade of the energy crisis because of the oil shocks.
The Saudi Arabian embargo has yet to catch up with the American motorist. It's predicted that our supply of imported crude oil will fall short 4 million barrels a day by midwinter. That's 25% of the national supply. This sign is accurate today. It seems almost certain that in a few weeks it will have to come down.
Energy transition became a very common word as the solution for the energy crisis. At that time, it could designate any kind of technology that would increase the energy sovereignty of the West. So in the US, it was mainly coal extraction. More coal was described as an energy transition in a strange way. If we all talk about energy transition today, it's probably because Jimmy Carter, the US president, made an important speech in 1977 where he used this word, energy transition.
Tonight I want to have an unpleasant talk with you about a problem that's unprecedented in our history. The energy crisis has not yet overwhelmed us, but it will. We must look back in the history to understand our energy problem. Twice in the last several hundred years, there's been a transition in the way people use energy. The first was about 200 years ago, when we changed away from wood, which had provided about 90% of all fuel, to coal. This change became the basis of the Industrial Revolution. The second change took place in this century, with the growing use of oil and natural gas. Because we are now running out of gas and oil, we must prepare quickly for a third change.
After this speech, everybody started to talk about energy transition. The word crosses the Atlantic, and you find it in French, in Italian, in Spanish very quickly. And more problematic, the environmentalist movement started to talk about energy transition. Friends of the Earth, which was anti-nuclear, became for an energy transition towards solar. It was a way also for the environmentalist movement to be co-opted by the US administration. They started to participate in energy policy circles. Energy transition was also very useful for oil companies. In the early 1980s, Exxon, the US oil company, was not climato-skeptics, but they were transitionists. They will explain that, of course, there is climate change, but we have time to do the energy transition. Many climatologists actually say the same thing. When you read articles from the late 1970s, very often you got this schedule. The climate change will have economic consequences around 2020. It will be catastrophic by 2070. But when you write 2070 in 1975 or 1978, it seems science fiction. And the reasoning goes that, of course, that leaves us time to make an energy transition, because everybody knows that it takes 50 years to make an energy transition. Because in the past, we have done energy transition. So here you've got a good example of how a false history creates also a false future. So the Exxon were just, rehearsing this very stupid idea. They knew it was wrong. There's an interesting speech made by the chief of Exxon R&D in 1982. He's called Edward David. He says that we have time to do the energy transition. And then 3 months later, he's in Beijing talking about energy, climate change, and so on with the Chinese. And he said that coal is going to be the major energy source of the 21st century. So he knew it was rubbish. In an interesting way, energy transition was used in the first place as a kind of delaying tactics. And then energy transition was also very practical for governments. Governments who do not want to say they do nothing, they say, of course, we are doing an energy transition. There is a famous discourse by George Bush father during his presidential campaign who mentioned the White House effect. There is the greenhouse effect, climate change, but we're going to fight it with the White House effect, with the power of the White House. All this rubbish thing then is used in the diplomatic agenda at the Rio conference of '92.
In June 1992, the world met in Rio to discuss the fate of planet Earth. In this largest summit and very first Earth summit ever held, representatives from 166 countries came together with the hopes of deciding specific agreements that would balance environmental preservation with economic needs.
You've got two important characters. One is John Sununu. He's the chief of staff of George Bush. And he's giving orders to Robert Weinstein, who is the chief US negotiator for Rio, and is also the chair of IPCC Group 3. The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now it has this image of being like the big defender of climate, and they played an important role in stabilizing the scientific consensus around climate change. But at the beginning of the story, the IPCC was also part of delaying tactics. The US wanted to create a new group of experts, which was not international, but intergovernmental. The important letter is the I for intergovernmental. The point is to put the governments back into the loop of climate expertise. They wanted to have not just climatologists, but also they wanted to have, electricity producers, oil companies. When Robert Weinstein talks about John Sununu before Rio, it is very clear what is the status of energy transition. It is mainly rhetorical. Johnson & Who says, okay, we're not going to agree on emission targets. We're not going to sign a treaty limiting the use of energy of the US economy. It's not acceptable. We're not going to play the technology card, talk about technologies, talk about innovations, talk about energy transitions as a way out of the climate crisis. Energy transition is a more subtle way of climate denial, in a way. It is a way to be on the good side of the story, of the history. We are the good guys, we are doing energy transitions. Because, of course, energy transition is about investment, it is about new technologies, it is about capital.
Installateurs van zonnepanelen hebben het druk.
Het aantal zonneparken is de laatste jaren explosief toegenomen.
Op ruim 1,5 miljoen huizen liggen hier nu zonnepanelen. En de vraag is nog altijd ongekend hoog.
There is a lot of optimistic discourse around energy transition because they see the very fast deployment of solar panels. It's a very naive way of presenting the thing, or dishonest. I mean, it is very easy to see that you can have a very massive expansion of renewable electricity without a symmetrical decrease of fossil fuels. Today, we've got a very fast expansion of solar panels in China in particular, but they are not closing coal power plants, certainly not at the same rhythm. The fact that renewables are becoming competitive is the only good news about climate in the last 20 years. It is the only good news, but that doesn't make an energy transition. It is just one sector. Electricity production is 40% of CO2 emissions. Then you've got sectors like agriculture, which is a massive emitter. I mean, agriculture is completely dependent on carbon for fertilizers, for plastic, and all sorts of machines. Then you've got the construction industry, which is dependent on cement and steel, therefore on CO2. In all these sectors, like construction, agriculture, actually there is a transition towards carbon globally. So this idea of energy transition is extraordinarily strange when you think about it. Basically, we have projected something which could work for electricity on the rest of the economy. What we do when we put wind turbine or solar panels or even electric vehicles, we decrease the carbon intensity of the economy. We're not doing an energy transition. And I think it is very important to remain rigorous on the terms, because when you say you decrease the carbon intensity of the economy, you're forced to leave on the table, on the political table, in the political discussion, the size of the economy, because it is an important factor of our emissions. If you say energy transition, like the idea that in 2 or 3 decades we'll have completely disconnected our economy to the climate, then you can imagine an ever-growing economy not altering the climate anymore, so you don't need to bother about, redistribution, because the cake is going to grow, so everybody will get richer and everything will be fine. But it is deeply wrong. It's not the right way to understand what's going to happen. The big question is what we're going to do with this clean electricity. If it is to power 1.5 billion electric cars made of steel and getting bigger and bigger, we're not going to solve the climate issue like this. Obviously, we have to think about not replacing one for one the world we have. We need to really think about, the kind of material world we want. One of the biggest offshore wind farms is in the Norwegian Sea. It is owned by Equinor, and it is used to power the oil platform, the oil rigs in the Norwegian Sea. One of the biggest danger, which is probably what is going to happen, is that you've got clean electricity energizing a grey world. A world made of cars, of industrial agriculture, of growing urbanization, of airplanes, and all these things are not going to be decarbonized. The idea that we're going to reach net zero by 2050 or 2070, you could believe that perhaps in 2015. 10 years later, that seems ludicrous. To reach net zero, you need a lot of negative emissions. So it is technologies that will absorb CO2 from the atmosphere and pump it under the ground. You end up with this idea that after 2050 we will need 10 gigatons of negative emissions. To do that, you need to invent machines, machines that are enormous, that would consume an enormous amount of electricity, that will probably be polluting, because to capture CO2 you need chemicals. Is it really what we want to do? Because of this objective of net zero, there is money going into startups pretending they are going to invent these machines. Most of the time they don't have the beginning of a technological solution.
So what do we have to do?
The key thing is to reflect upon what we want to do with the CO2. There will be CO2 in the economy by 2050. The key question should be for what? To do what? Is it really to improve the welfare of population, or is it just to accumulate capital? Is it to create more profit, or is it to improve health? In many different sectors, like cement, there will be CO2. Cement can be very useful to make an hospital, to build a school, to build a water network or whatever. It can be completely useless, like another highway in the rich world, right? This is the kind of discussion we need to have. So I think the big question of climate change should be redistribution. It is redistribution between countries, between social classes. It is really a continuation of the social question in a way. And pretending that innovation is going to solve everything is a way not to ask these political questions, because it prevents the population to understand that what is really at stake with climate change is this. It is what we do with the CO2 we emit.
Isn't it just a problem of capitalism in essence?
Unfortunately, it goes beyond capitalism, because it will be much more difficult to get out of CO2 than getting out of capitalism. We also have to recognize that the biggest oil companies are national companies today. So capitalism is a problem, but getting out of it is not enough. It goes even deeper than that.
All that we needed was right. The threshold is breaking.
Those who think we're powerless to do anything about this greenhouse effect are forgetting about the White House effect.
Open to everything, happy and sad. Seeing the good when
well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Seeing the sun
thank you very, very much.
Can't really see. Hoping the sun
Please.
will at least look at me. Focus on everything better today. All that I needed, I never could say.